All right, so today I want to do another prediction for the future video. And today I want to talk about democracy and kind of the general way that we run society, at least on the government, standard. And like right now, most first world countries have a democracy, namely Canada and the US isn't a direct democracy, it's a republic, but it's somewhat similar to a like how Canada runs our country. But again, that's a different idea in and of itself. So basically, the prediction is that we won't have a democracy in the future. And this is one that I think will take a little longer than the climate change one to to ring true for people to finally realize it. Now, like I say, the one caveat to all these predictions is the world becomes more and more authoritarian. Now, the way it'll come more and more authoritarian will be through the people supporting it, right? And it's for the simple reason that the best way to enslave people or to, have an authoritarian government is to convince people that they're free within that system, basically. And that's what the government's pushing for. And like I said, that's the one caveat that maybe so I mean that's very likely too. But assuming the Canada stays somewhat free because it's definitely not a free country. Compared to some of the tin pot third world, dictatorship kind of countries, yeah, it is. But compared to even a relatively ideal standard, it's not a free country at all. So again, I just wanted to point that out. But I think that assuming that we don't become more and more authoritarian, communist, which we're well on our way to doing that, but I think that even the free countries of the world, no one's going to have democracy in the future for the simple reason that democracy is one of those things that sounds really good in theory but doesn't work in practice. For the simple reason that it's the you know two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for supper scenario. It's mob rule, that kind of stuff. And the problem with democracy is that a majority of people can vote to do anything they want to a minority of people. And what we're seeing now, and what inevitably always happens in democracy, is that a majority of people take stuff by, through the state, for, whether it's the military, whether it's the police, forcing the minority to comply, and eventually they run out of stuff to take, and that majority of people has become so decadent and not able to produce stuff on their own. Look at the amount of people on welfare. Look at the amount of people that have had 2-3 generations of people on welfare, or super poor, and they basically get by because government benefits, basically. So those kind of people aren't going to be able to produce on their own. So the minute they don't have any more money to steal, the minute the government can't just keep printing more money and raising taxes more to pay for those people, the entire system goes belly up. And that's what's going to happen with democracy more than likely. Now, the system that we should be running, I'm not completely sure. I would say, again, anything along the lines of a more anarchistic, or more realistically, not that I don't believe in that, but more realistically, a minarchist system. Now, the only way to have a democracy that succeeds is to have it literally written into the Constitution, um, and backed up by allowing the people to be able to defend against any encroachments on that with force. Basically, you'd have to have it written into, the way to do it nowadays would be to, okay, we can't have free healthcare, we can't have welfare, we can't have excessive taxation. Taxation has to be the same no matter who you are, all this kind of stuff. And again, not that I don't think that rich people should give more back to society. The problem is that when you allow people to vote to take money from those kind of people, because there's obviously less rich people than there is middle class and or poor, the poor just keep voting to take more and more of their stuff, and eventually the rich people just leave or they're taxed out of existence. And again, that's when the system goes belly up, because the system was reliant on those people, and when they're gone, you don't have the money to pay for all your free stuff. So the only way to run a democracy would be, number one, no free stuff, no free stuff. And again, I know it isn't free, it's taxpayer funded, but for the people getting it, most of them, it's free. So no free stuff. I don't, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. You need a stringent First Amendment, comparable thing. Free speech, free speech is an absolute. There's no of free speech, but accept this, so accept that, accept this, because the minute you allow exceptions, other than obvious calls to violence, um, and again, that's not free speech anyway. Again, you're calling for people to be injured, which isn't something that even a anarchist would believe in, for example, other than the more communist anarchist, which again is kind of an oxymoron. But anyway, um, that's how you would run the system. Now, again, obviously, someone will point out, oh, well, what would you do in this scenario? How do you, what if this scenario comes up? I don't have enough time in one video to get into every little scenario that would come up. And number two, that's not how we run society anyway, because there's a million what ifs that completely contradict and completely disprove democracy, but yet we don't let that allow us to go away from democracy. So just because you can come up with one little what if scenario against a minarchist system, for example, doesn't mean that we shouldn't adopt a system like that. So basically, getting back to the more main point here, like I say, democracy doesn't work in a nutshell because the majority will vote to take the resources of the minority, and eventually the resources run out, leaving the majority, not like I say, the majority gets so decadent that they've lost the ability to produce things on by themselves, and at some point they it runs out, and then everything goes belly up. The other problem with democracy too is that politicians, being a politician is a very lucrative thing. A lot of these politicians are multimillionaires, and they're people that make $150,000, $200,000 a year salaries, and yet they have net worths up, some of them even in the tens of millions of dollars. So clearly, there's a lot of kickbacks that you can get. There's a lot of tons and tons of benefits to being a politician that even an everyday citizen, even if you work in a big corporation or something, wouldn't have access to. So, and these politicians recognize that, hey, and that's the problem too with democracy is power hungry people. Again, the left has this big problem with corporations because they think power hungry people will, seek out, running corporations to gain more power and wealth and resources and all that kind of stuff, which they're right to an extent, but they're wrong in that they think that that's the problem with the free market. But what they completely ignore is that the government is more of a monopoly than any corporation, and it's not even close under any system either. So, and the fact that they have no problem with that just goes to show that they haven't put much thought into this kind of stuff. And that's the problem with government is you get and democracy is that you get these politicians that get in, and how they get in is they get in is that their ideas don't appeal to a majority of people. So how they get in is they promise free stuff more, or if there already is free stuff, more free stuff to the population, and they get in, because their ideas aren't good. Like that's the problem nowadays too, is that politicians tend to fall in two main camps. There's the free stuff camp, which tends to be the left, and there's the um, we're actually going to offer you some value, which tends to be the right, at least in principle. The problem was that the left, in reality and even in principle, doesn't work. The right, in the current way the right is going, like the conservatives in Canada, perfect example of this. Terrible, 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 terrible. And for the simple reason that they're not really actually conservative. They should switch their name to the moderates. They could even switch their name to the left, center left party, because they basically are center left. Like they're not against, they want to keep running massive deficits, they want to keep the carbon tax, they want to keep mass immigration. Again, they're just not as left as the liberals, which are pretty far left. And that's why people think that they're so far to the right. The reality is that the reason why they appear so far to the right is that the liberals are that far to the left. Like the liberals are damn near communists, and at least on a political spectrum. The conservatives are pretty much dead set in the middle. I would argue they're actually a little to the left, at least if you look at their policies. And again, that's the problem with democracy too. Is like I say, the main thing. People just can't resist the free stuff. The politicians want power, wealth, resources, all this kind of stuff. And rather than appeal to people through logic, through reason, through evidence, they just say, hey, I can get all the wealth I need in the world through promising people free stuff. I'm going to do that. And that's how politicians get elected nowadays. And that's the problem with it, is that that kind of stuff can exist. Like that kind of stuff, I mean, it exists way too much, but it really shouldn't. And the problem with it too is that it's never going to go away until the system goes completely belly up. And again, that's the other problem with democracy too, is that eventually it goes belly up and a ton of people suffer. A ton of people suffer. Um, so basically, that's my prediction. This is something that's probably going to take hundreds of years to happen. I could see it happening maybe within some, someone like me, someone in the younger generations of people's lifetime, but this is something that probably won't happen for a while, and for the simple reason that the government will continue to just print money until they can't print money no more. They'll continue to give free stuff until there's no more free stuff to give. They'll continue to tax the rich, or basically anybody above median income, basically, not just the rich, until they can't tax them anymore. That's the problem too, is that we're going to end up that, like I say, that's the big thing that socialists get wrong too, is that they think that it helps the poor rise up into the middle class, but in reality what it does is it just brings down the middle class into the lower middle class. So everybody's poor rather than a small percentage of people being poor. That's basically what happens within socialism. And that rich, bureaucratic, elitist, 1%, 0.1%, whatever you want to call it, still remains under socialism. Like, show me a socialist country where there isn't that really small percent of people that are really rich, that the rules don't apply to them, all that kind of stuff. Like, every socialist country has that. There's corruption runs rampant because, again, all you have to do to get elected is just promise people free stuff. And again, they don't care how corrupt you are as long as you give them their free stuff. Like, look at Justin Trudeau. The guy had, very low approval rating, multiple corruption, multiple scandals, and yet he still got elected with relative ease. Why? Because he not only did he keep up the free stuff, but he promised more free stuff. So, like I said, that's kind of how that works. But anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you liked it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. I appreciate any donations, but it's very least just hit that like and subscribe. And last thing, as always, check out my BitChute channel as well.